Welcome to today's live stream about Jenkins LTS 2.303.1. Normally we do these a little bit closer to the release date, which was last Wednesday, August 25th, but my co-host, Mark, decided to go into the woods with no internet. How is that even possible?
The embarrassing thing is we did have internet. I just ignored it. So I was great because it was a cabin. We were on the shores of a lake in northern Utah near the Idaho border. It was a lot of fun.
With internet, but you ignored it.
And yeah, I admit it. I acted like I didn't have internet in large measure. It was great.
If we have time at the end, we may talk about that. But anyway, LTS. And this wasn't just any other LTS. This was the next big LTS, right? This was the big move from 289 to 303. In case people haven't watched this before, my name is Darren Pope. What am I? 1, 2, 3, a developer advocate for CloudBees. Mark Waite over here is the documentation officer for the Jenkins project, as well as being a CloudBees employee. And every 4 weeks, it's stuck to that since we've been doing these. Every 4 weeks, we come on and talk about the latest LTS. Okay, it's almost 5 weeks because of last week, but give us a break. Come on. Mark was on vacation. And what we try to do is get the community caught up, just in case you haven't seen what the new release is about or some of the gotchas that might be occurring. And, today that's what we're going to talk about. And there were a lot it didn't seem very big. And as we were preparing for this today, it's like, oh, we need to remember to talk about this and this and this. And I was like, oh, there were actually a lot of things in here. So if you haven't been with us live before, or if you're watching the replay, you're going to want to watch this one to the end. There's a lot of details if you're going to be installing or upgrading to the latest LTS. But just in case people don't understand how the Jenkins LTS process works, Mark, you get to do your standard. Here's what the Jenkins LTS is. So what is the LTS process, Mark?
So the Jenkins long-term support process creates a stable release every 3 months that's based on a selected baseline of one of the weekly releases. That base release is selected, then changes that might be necessary are backported to it so that it is nice and stable. And then that becomes the base that we use for the LTS releases that now happen each month thereafter for the next 2 months. So 2.303.1 releases now, a month later, .2, a month after that, .3, and then the next month we have chosen a new baseline, we roll to the new baseline. This gives our users a nice stable baseline and lets people who want the more aggressive weekly release to stay on weekly, help us test it, validate it, see how things work. LTS users see changes, major changes about every 3 months.
But that's it, right? And sometimes you might see a 0.4, on a rare, not even as often as a blue moon, you may see a .5.
Right, and in fact, we're even considering an out of order release right now, and we'll talk about it during the session. We can talk about locales in Docker images, and that's a good topic for us.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into the release notes? Because again, we talked about them. If we take a look at it real quick, it's not that long. I mean, it looks like it's long. And some of the line items are long, but it's really, compared to 277 or even 289, this is a fairly small release.
It is, right. And it looks relatively straightforward, and in many functional areas, it is quite straightforward, but there are some crucial, what you might call infrastructure or environment kind of changes that are worth discussing here, and people need to be aware that these environment or infra type changes are happening.
Yep. And in case people don't understand what these 3 weather icons mean, the sunny, the cloudy, and the rainy, what do these mean?
Okay, so that's a direct access to the Jenkins rating system, where a user of the Jenkins long-term support release can tell us by very simple, non-authenticated, non-prompted answer, hey, what's your experience been with this release? We have it for both LTS and for weekly. If they click the sunshine, that's meant as a vote to say, I had no issue. If they click the cloud, that says, oh, I had an issue, and it will then pop up a dialog that offers to have them tell us what is the bug ID of the problem you encountered. That then gets flagged in this community reported issues line that is right below it. And that last column, that rain falling out of the clouds, that's I had to roll back. And that's a more serious condition. That says something was so surprising in this release that the user said, I have to fall back to the preceding version.
Yep. And usually on most of the .2s, .3s, or whatevers, and just not the .1s, we don't have this section here. But since this is a .1, let's talk about what this means.
Yeah, so because it's a .1, we had to do some backport. So a backport means we selected 2.303 as the baseline. While after having made that selections, there were 3 or 4 releases of Jenkins Weekly after that. In those 3 or 4 Jenkins Weekly releases, we discovered issues that we thought were important enough we should backport them to 303.1. And so each of these items that you see on the list here is a backport that's brought into 303.1 that was not in 303. So these are things that Weekly through our 303 did not include, but we felt were so important we need to include them to assure that they're in 303.1.
Right. And one of these items, using Java 11 and Docker images instead of Java 8, we're going to spend a lot more time talking about.
Absolutely.
Let's get into the meat of this, of the big changes since the latest LTS. Now,
Sure.
a couple of big bugs, and that's what the big red means. In case you don't understand what the coloring here means, there's a legend right here at the very top of the page, and it'll tell you the larger the dot, the bigger the thing is, I guess, let's say, versus the smaller the dot, it's like, okay, not as big as the bigger dot. Does that make sense?
It does, and you're right. You described it very well. Major items, security fixes, major bugs, or major enhancements are a bigger dot, so you look at them more likely.
Yep. So a couple of larger fixes at the top, but then this third one that's here, removing digester.
Right. So Jenkins, for the longest time, was bundling inside of it the Apache's Common Digester 2 library. And by bundling that library, it allowed plugins and others to develop a dependency on that library. However, Commons Digester 2 last released over 10 years ago and is no longer maintained. So Commons Digester 2 really is not an especially safe choice of something to have inside something that's deployed like Jenkins Core is on 300,000 installations around the world. So the Jenkins developers intentionally removed Commons Digester 2 from Jenkins Core. They worked with plugin maintainers to notify plugin maintainers of plugins that depended on and assure that they would release those plugins, or that the plugins were so old that they were no longer maintained and they would just have to, users would have to find another solution for those plugins.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about Commons as we get into the upgrade guide in a few moments. But that was probably one of the big ones. And then, to me, the next big one was recommendations for running on Java 11. And we have one comment I do want to go and put up here, and this could be what you run into. I had a problem installing Java 11 on my Windows agents, but not on the Linux ones. And that,
Interesting.
It doesn't sound too surprising to me. But Mitcha, if you're still there, what flavor of the JDK were you trying to install on Windows? Was it Adopt Open JDK? Was it a different one? Because that would be interesting to know.
Right. I've been running Adopt Open JDK on my Windows boxes with agents for quite a while. I run agents that use both the inbound agent protocol, classically incorrectly named as JNLP, but it uses the inbound protocol and the SSH protocol. So Mitya, by all means, if you've had issues there, feel free to submit a bug report. We'd love to know more about, or ask the question in the chat channels on the user list for more conversations about the problems you encountered.
Yeah. And what was the backstory behind the recommendation to 11 now? Now, obviously, Jenkins has been supporting Java 11 for 2 years now.
Yeah, 2 years plus.
So what was the item that pushed it over the line this time to finally recommend it?
Well, it was more a combination of multiple themes that were coming out, because Java 11 support is becoming significantly better on multi-platform environments. So the ARM 64-bit platform, for instance, just has better support for Java 11 than Java 8. System 390 on the IBM mainframe has much better support for Java 11 than for Java 8. And that made it interesting to us to say, all right, it's about time we move to Java 11. We still support Java 8. We actually still compile with Java 8, but we want our users to begin the process of moving to Java 11 so that when the day comes that Java 8 is no longer supported, they'll have running Java 11 that they've been confidently able to use and run.
Okay. And that's good. And we'll go back to Mitch here. He says, if I'm not mistaken, it was Oracle Java.
Okay. Well, and so Oracle Java's license agreement is commonly restrictive, and it may be a barrier. He may want to try either adopt OpenJDK, what's now called Temurin, adopt OpenJDK's new distribution Temurin, or Amazon Corretto, or the OpenJDK distribution from Red Hat. Any one of those three are validated with the JDK compliance kit and fully supported by those particular vendors, and they all provide a Windows platform.
Okay. I did not know that OpenJDK now supported Windows installation.
Yeah, Red Hat has done amazing things. I'm very impressed with their work on OpenJDK.
Okay, good to know. Let's see, what else did we want to call out on this? One that I thought was funny. I have to call it out. Change the word number to integer in the error message of the number field. Did you look into that one at all?
I remember the discussions on it, and it in fact is doing a more precise description of what that thing is. It's an integer. A number could be a floating point, and this thing really required an integer.
Yeah, and actually, this that was one of that was sort of like the joke one. This is the one that I've been watching for a long time. Is that now process management for FreeBSD actually works out of the box?
Right, and that's nice. That's nice for those of us who are FreeBSD lovers. It really is great to have one more evidence that Jenkins cares about platform portability.
And this now gives me the opportunity to shoot some new videos for FreeBSD, because I was doing this before realizing that it's like, oh wait, right, we don't have support for FreeBSD.
Yeah, well,
well, you could, but not process management.
We've run on FreeBSD for years, and we're very happy with FreeBSD. But this is one more improvement for the FreeBSD implementation.
Yeah. Any other items that you want to talk through specifically on the release notes before we look at upgrades?
Just systematically upgrading various components like Jetty and Spring and things like that, that it's just healthy for us to do those kind of upgrades. We'll talk about the upgrade guide on more details, but be mindful that we're taking care to upgrade components, keep them up to date, and more rigorously track them as up to date. As the world has become more sensitive to the security of components in the software supply chain, Jenkins is also being more sensitive and more aware to be sure that we keep the components on which we depend current and up to date.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, do we want to go ahead and move into the upgrade guide?
I think we should.
Because as much as this list, and of course, if you get beyond the from update stapler on down, that's basically just bump type items, right? So,
well, there's some hiding in there. They're also mentioned in the upgrade guide, but I think we'll do better if we use the upgrade guide as our framework to talk about them, because it's not as clear to me looking at this kind of a list as it is looking at the big headings in the upgrade guide. The big headings in the upgrade guide warn about the big rocks that might be in the way.
Yeah. I guess what I was trying to say is if you look at just basically this part, which is right above the update or remove type things, this doesn't look to be very big.
Right.
In contrast, typically the upgrade guide is fairly small.
Yeah,
But
and
in this release, it's very large.
correct.
So let's just tackle it from top down. The default Docker images now use Java 11.
Right. So now there are many different ways to install and interact with Jenkins. I could install it with the MSI file. I could install it from an RPM file on CentOS or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I can install it from a deb file on Debian or on Ubuntu. Many users are deciding to move to Docker images as their way of managing their Jenkins installation. And those Docker images are referenced by these tags. And there is a tag that is intentionally simplified, in this case LTS or 2.303.1. Neither of those give you any information in the tag name about what operating system is being used, what Java version is being used, etc. Those are all just you as a user, except you'll take whatever they give you. And that's good. That's fine. You have every right to make that choice. We needed to make a choice about which version of Java should we be bundling here. And so we've intentionally shifted from bundling Java 8 inside those images to bundling Java 11. Now, some users may say, I've got to have Java 8. I cannot switch to Java 11. Then they can use these different tags, -JDK8, that more specifically say, I absolutely want Java 8. And so we don't prevent users from using Java 11 with Docker, but if they were previously using the undifferentiated tag, they now need to switch and specifically say, no, I want JDK8.
Right. It's a fairly common pattern for, I'm going to use the word deprecate. It's not what it really means, but just it's older and
yeah,
let the default be the current recommendations, which since the recommendation was to be 11 with this release, then why not also allow the container image default to also be 11?
Right. It's a variation on what we did in an earlier weekly release, where we did the same thing for Jenkins/Jenkins:"latest." It's pretty common in Docker images to have a tag called latest. And the tag called latest is one that users know is not guaranteed to stay fixed at any point. It will regularly be updated with newer version of something. If you want exactly a specific version, you need to say much more than just give me latest.
Correct. Let's move. Do you want to talk about some of the changes, though, with some of the images?
Yeah,
From Buster to because
right.
I think that falls. Does that fall into here, or does it fall into this next?
No,
section?
that section that you're in is a good place to talk to that. So as part of this change, we also use this opportunity because our images, the LTS and the LTS-slim images, are both based on the Debian operating system. And we use this change and this opportunity to switch the base operating system from Debian 10, the code name is Buster, to Debian 11, the code name is Bullseye. Debian 11 had spent a good 2 or 3 years being developed and just released in, I think it was in August. So it's a relatively new release, nice and fresh with all sorts of current packages on it. Good time for us to make this transition. So we switched from Debian Buster to Debian Bullseye. Now that's a positive because it means you get a newer Linux utilities, you get newer capabilities inside the thing. However, the vendors sometimes change packaging in those transitions. And in this case, Debian changed the packaging. It's a good thing. They realized they could make their images a little smaller, and they made them smaller by removing some packages. So some users of Jenkins 2.303.1 may need to install additional packages into their Docker image. As an example, my Jenkins controller uses the PS command to check for orphan processes. It's a check that I like to run because I'm trying to find bugs. The PS command was removed from the Debian Bullseye default image. It's still in the Buster image, but Bullseye doesn't have it. So for 2.303.1, I had to install one additional file set to get that utility. Users may find some tool they need was installed before and isn't installed with Bullseye, and they'll need to install it.
Now, the bigger question is, should you be execing into a container and doing things directly in the container? That's not why we're here today. That's
Right.
a different conversation. But,
Well, and that's actually it's even worse, the thing that I'm doing, because I'm openly acknowledging that there are times when I will allow myself to execute a job on the controller, and in a production environment, that's a really bad choice. And we have administrative monitors that tell people, don't you do that. But in my case, I'm watching for bugs in Jenkins with this little check. Right. And so I give myself a pass that I allow myself to run on the controller about once an hour. And other than that, I'm always have disabled execution on the controller. So it's the case that I'm doing is a little bizarre, right? It's not something that a production Jenkins user would do, because their goal is not to find bugs in Jenkins. Their goal is to create great software using Jenkins.
Correct. Now, let's move on to this next one. A couple of obsolete images, and one of which is CentOS. Now, don't freak out. It's like, wait, didn't we just see CentOS above? We did see CentOS above, but we saw it as CentOS 7. And this is basically because CentOS 8 is no longer true, I guess, is one way to say it.
Yeah, it's a fun story, right? CentOS has changed their strategy. CentOS used to be a direct derivative of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And the CentOS project said that's not terribly useful. So instead, they've changed that. Now they have this thing called CentOS Stream that is an immediate predecessor to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So it fills the gap between Fedora, which is their cutting edge, try everything out and do really wild stuff, and their enterprise grade Red Hat Enterprise Linux. CentOS Stream is very close to Enterprise Linux, but is not yet Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so it's a different place in their hierarchy, and they've stopped delivering updates to CentOS 8. So CentOS 8.4 doesn't exist, or it didn't exist until a few weeks ago, and there isn't a Docker image for CentOS 8.4 at all. So CentOS 8 is an orphan from the CentOS project, and we decided this is a great time for us to drop support for CentOS 8 from ours. If someone needs an RPM-based distribution, they should use CentOS 7, or they can use Alma Linux, which is a newly added distribution that is following the same pattern that CentOS 8 did.
Now, I want to bring up something that Marcin has here, switching 8 with UBI 8.
Also, yes, and that's a good choice as well. That's a perfectly valid choice. And the UBI images are available, and they're based on that same nice, stable Red Hat code base.
So we spent a lot of time talking about CentOS. I think we'll spend about 5 seconds saying Microsoft has ended support for 1809 images.
Right. So use LTSC 2019 instead. The long-term support channel is what they call LTSC.
Yep. Okay. Then we get into this. Your favorite thing to talk about, 390.
Right. So I'm really pleased to announce that we support multiple architectures. This is an item that's been on the Jenkins roadmap for almost 2 years now. And we wanted very much to be able to support more than just the AMD 64, the Intel 64-bit architecture. And what we've done now is, thanks to the amazing work of Tim Jacomb and of Damien DePortal, we have support for ARM 64, PowerPC 64, and System 390 in certain of our key images. And we're really delighted to have that. It's good to see. It's fun to interact with people who want to do work on these other platforms. we've seen, for instance, a nice performance boost and cost savings by switching some of the Jenkins infrastructure to ARM64.
That's a good thing. I was going to say other things, but I can't say those today. Let's move into plugins that don't support Java 11. Now, we talked about if you're going to be using that container image and you're using the default that's based on Java 11, but then you're also trying to use the same plugins. Okay, what's the backstory for this one?
Yeah, and the backstory here is that about 7-8 years ago, the cool and creative idea was, let's allow users to write Jenkins plugins in Ruby. Ruby's a nice, very powerful scripting language, great place to write code. Let's allow them to write Jenkins plugins in Ruby. And so the Ruby Runtime plugin was created. It provides an environment where a plugin written in Ruby can be executed using the JRuby runtime. However, we've since learned by painful, awful, hard experience that the Ruby Runtime plugin is a terrible thing to maintain. We're unable to port it forward to Java 11. And so because it can't run on Java 11, any plugins that use or require the Ruby runtime won't run on Java 11-based Jenkins either. Now, the relief thing here is that most of these plugins were last released between 5 and 7 years ago. So if you're dependent on one of these plugins that uses the Ruby runtime, you need to find a different thing to do. And almost all of them, it's pretty easy to find that different thing.
Yep. Long list here. We'll let you go through that. I want to talk about this next one. I had not read the upgrade guide, and I'm going through and setting stuff up on a new set of CentOS 7 machines, and all of a sudden nothing is installing. And I'm getting ready to open up a nasty Jira saying, this is broken. But then I realize, oh wait, let me go look in the upgrade notes. And then all of a sudden, actually I didn't even look at the upgrade notes. Let me show you what I went and looked at. I looked at the actual documentation. And the documentation here says, oh, you need daemonize. What? Why do I need daemonize now? What caused that fresh pain to occur?
Yeah, so one of the contributors looked carefully at the Jenkins packaging system that was delivering our RPM and saw that for RPM-based solutions, it was doing a bunch of heroic push-ups in order to place the Jenkins Java process into the background, detach it from its controlling terminal, basically turn it into a Unix daemon. And it was doing all these heroic shell level things that on the Debian distributions, we use a simple command called daemon to do all the same things. The nice thing about using those simple commands is it's much less likely that we've made a mistake in how to detach from your controlling terminal, how to put yourself in the background, because the daemon program, or in this case on the RPM systems, the daemonize program is carefully written to do that very, very well.
The short of that is it's hard.
Well, it's another opportunity to have a bug, right? It's another opportunity for somebody to make a mistake because they aren't as familiar with what it means to become a daemon as the authors of the daemonize program are.
Correct. So in case you're running on CentOS and you're doing the upgrade or doing a fresh installation, you're going to need to grab the Apple repo, make sure it's there, or wherever else you can get daemonize from. It all boils down to, it's not so much that you need Apple, but you need the daemonize package. That's what it's going to look for.
Right. So, and that's a fun story that we had a user who was running CentOS 6 who said, hey, my CentOS 6 doesn't have daemonize. I'll just install daemonize from source. Oh, that doesn't work because what this RPM says is it depends on the package daemonize, not just the program daemonize. And that's how RPM dependencies are expressed, is by packages. So it's the right thing to do, but it means you need to use the daemonize package. And in order to get that package, the easiest way is to enable this this EPEL, so you pronounce it EPEL,
I call it
EPEL
EPEL,
release
yeah.
package.
I want to bring in one comment from Marcin, because I've had this same question. Why not use
Oh.
systemd?
Oh, that's a great thing, and we would love to have a pull request that proposes to switch to systemd, because that's really the place where this belongs. Absolutely. The person who implemented this change specifically commented in the implementation, really, we need to switch both Debian and the RPM system to use systemd. Systemd, when we originally implemented these things, was pretty young. That was now 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It's now a very mature, well-loved system used almost universally across Linux distributions. So absolute wholehearted agreement. We would love to have a pull request for the Debian packaging and a pull request for the Red Hat packaging from somebody who is confident in their creation of systemd packages and willing to provide the pull request. Wholehearted agreement.
That's the reason, Marcin. That's the reason. Well, you have to think about it. You just called out CentOS 6. I can't do systemd on CentOS 6.
Right, but
correctly.
thankfully, CentOS 6 was obsolete as of November of 2020. They're no longer doing maintenance on it. So,
and your
so we
point
can
is,
safely ignore it.
you might be able to safely ignore it, but people are still using it, obviously.
Correct. Yep.
And I've still seen people using CentOS 5.
Oh, wow.
So this is nothing just because we moved on, and like Marcin said, it's like systemd, man. It's been out there. Mark, you just said 7, 8 years. You know, it's been really warm and fuzzy for the past 3 to 4 years, easily.
Absolutely.
Right. But not everybody upgrades OSs that often. So having a rock solid, unfortunate, we'll call it that way, demonized process is still is the lowest common denominator right now. Systemd
Right.
is not. So
Yeah,
I
and
wish it were.
I think we would be benefited by going to systemd, and I fully support it. We just haven't had a contributor yet step up to say, hey, I'm going to do systemd.
Right. Okay, now we get into sort of what I call the nuts and bolts of this release. And this was like the bottom half of the release notes.
Right.
So Commons Digester, gone. Right? Last released, you've already said this, in 2010.
Right.
I'm no rocket scientist, but that's 11 years.
Well, for me, it's somewhat of a point of pride. Wow, we've got a system that's able to execute 11-year-old code. So that's really cool. We've done a good job of preserving compatibility. That's really cool. But it's time to admit this one needs to be removed.
Yes. So just a handful of plugins or some suspended plugins already that were gone. So again, hopefully if any of your plugins pop up on this, and this is one thing we didn't mention that we've talked about before. Before you do upgrades, like before you do your yum upgrade Jenkins or whatever it is, or apt-get update Jenkins, upgrade all your plugins. Actually, your -1 on that is back up everything first with the process of shutdown. Get a good clean backup, then upgrade your plugins. Make sure everything's still working good, and then you can actually go and do your upgrade. Because these kinds of things will pop out during that process.
Right.
And most of the time, anyway.
You've got the exact right story. Please upgrade your plugins before please do a backup. Please upgrade your plugins before you upgrade Jenkins Core so that you're confident you've got the most recent. That was especially important with 2.277. Yep. It's equally as vital with 289 and now with 303.
Yep. So first off, Commons Digester, gone from Core. Stop bundling plugins with Jenkins. And this is where, I'll be honest, I get confused. Like the LDAP plugin, if I do install suggested plugins, is installed.
That's correct.
But that is not the same thing as what we're referencing here.
Right. So this is a packaging change, and the packaging change is for most users not relevant. That's why in that second paragraph it leads with the text "in very rare cases." Most people, they install the recommended plugins and it's all good. They're done. what happened was these plugins, the three that are listed here, External Monitor Job Plugin, LDAP, and PAM Authentication, were at one point part of Jenkins Core. And because they were part of Jenkins Core, that made their APIs part of the Jenkins Core API. So published part of the API. And so consumers would expect that that API would still be there. Now, beginning at this, I think it's 1.467, so many years ago now, they've been split out to independent plugins. And now it's time for us to say, all right, we're removing the bundling completely. You need to, if you need the External Monitor Job Program, you need to install that plugin. If you need PAM authentication, you need to install that plugin. It's likely you've already got them installed because were not always in the bundled form, the current release.
Right. Okay. So that's that one. And that would probably only apply to people if you're doing a fresh install. You're getting ready to do basically a job migration from, well, this could be a use case. I've been running on CentOS 6. I'm on a early version of 2X, like, whatever the early numbers were. And now I'm moving to CentOS 7, or I'm moving to some other OS, and I just want to get a clean Jenkins instance running, and I'm going to move my jobs. This could be one of those things that you might want to, it could sort of blindside you.
Right. And your use case is a good example. If you're doing a long upgrade, a long jump from many, many versions back to the current release, you might see something like this, and it's good to have it mentioned in the upgrade guide.
Absolutely. Okay. Removed a handful of JEP 200. JEP 200 came out in 235. I don't remember anymore.
Right. Yep.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for acknowledging that I might be right. So just removed some of the workarounds that were there. No big deal.
And all that does, that list for me supports the reminder, please upgrade your plugins.
Yes.
Truly, if you're running a Git client plugin from 2018, you're making a mistake. We've put work into that plugin since then, and the same holds true for every other one of these plugins. They've been worked on since then. It's important you update to current plugins.
What would be your response to someone saying, I tried upgrading my plugin and then everything broke, so I had to downgrade my plugin back to the version I was using, and I haven't been able to upgrade my plugin now for 2 years? What is your answer to that?
So be sure you open a bug report, because that will certainly surprise the Jenkins developers. Look at your system to see why that was broken, because it's not uncommon for someone to say, oh, I was broken by this, when what we did was we implemented, for example, a security defense mechanism, and you were dependent on the insecure code. So when you find those kind of things where, ooh, I can't upgrade, it becomes more and more dangerous the longer you avoid upgrading, because you may in fact be choosing consciously to have security issues that you have not closed by leaving those things at old versions.
Okay. I just wanted, you sort of brought it up, so I wanted to go ahead and just be explicit with an answer.
Great.
Because it's important to upgrade your plugins.
It is.
Okay, and the last three we're just going to sort of bundle together. I'm going to let you talk through these.
Yeah, so the last three are examples of cases where Jenkins Core had a capability that was added to it for purposes some years ago, and that capability that was added has long since become unmaintained by the people who provide it, or not relevant to the Jenkins community. And so these components have been removed from Jenkins Core so that Jenkins Core can move forward more easily.
So that's what these last three are all about.
Right.
So, so this is a variation, though, of what we just talked about, of removing LDAP and external monitor and whatever the third one was. Right. This is a variation of that same story.
Well, and the same story still applies here. Upgrade your plugins. Those plugins that are actively maintained, the act of upgrading your plugins will resolve any issues here. Those plugins that are no longer actively maintained, for instance, the examples on JNA POSIX, you just need to find a replacement for them. And in each of their cases, there are very easy replacements.
Right. Okay. So that's pretty much it from a what's new in 303.1 and the upgrade guide, which is really long. So although it's not as large of an upgrade as what we've seen before, or excuse me, it doesn't appear to be, in actuality, it is. Because you're going to want to probably measure 3 times and cut once. You want to go that one extra step this time, I think. As I found out with Demon Eyes. And yes, it would be wonderful to get System D. I do not doubt that. This is a great question from Mitya, if I can find my mouse. There we go. What can I do with plugins that don't have change logs? Check the commits. That's it, I think, right? That's the only thing you can do.
Right. And we've been actively promoting that plugin maintainers should automate their creation of changelogs with Release Drafter. We actually did a whole session, and we have recordings available of those sessions teaching Jenkins plugin developers how to change their process so that they use Release Drafter. What it does is it assembles a changelog as a draft based on the pull request to that GitHub repository. And then it's as trivial as publishing that drafted changelog, and now it presents very nicely both in the GitHub repository and on the site plugins.jenkins.io. Maybe, Darren, what you want to do is open up a browser and let's look at plugins.jenkins.io and pick the Git plugin. So just search Git. Why would you do that? So across the top tab of this thing, there are 4 choices: documentation, releases, issues, and dependencies. If you'll click releases, what it does is it reads from the GitHub release notes, release items, and presents it here in a nice readable format. So this changelog was generated for me automatically by the mere act of me merging pull requests. And notice that it's filled with hyperlinks. It tells us who the creator of the thing was, what the pull request was that generated a brief text description. This is what Release Drafter does, and it's actually a lot easier for me as a plugin maintainer than the old changelog files were.
Hopefully that helps you
understand
how to do this.
Right. The reality is you have to ask the plugin maintainers, please, could you give me a changelog? Please, could you use Release Drafter? Or follow our recordings and submit the pull request yourself to the plugin offering that implements Release Drafter. Because I've done that with a number of plugins. Now, sometimes the maintainer just ignores you. That's their choice. But if you submit a pull request saying, hey, here's how you do Release Drafter, you may be even more likely to persuade them to start doing changelogs.
Do you know where that video is where you went through Release Drafter? Is it on the Jenkins YouTube channel?
It is on the Jenkins YouTube channel, and I could hunt it down. I'm not sure we will find it terribly quickly. So youtube.com in the Jenkins channel, and I think it's called Jenkins CI.
CI, I think that's right. Yep.
And then here, if you search for Release Drafter, and let's see if it finds it.
Okay.
Oh, now that I've never used. So you just chose to search inside the playlist? It is. First hit.
I'm searching within the channel.
Right. I had never done that before. Yeah. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
because when I search up in the top box, it searches all of YouTube, and it doesn't help me.
Right.
There it is. So that first hit includes a segment on how to do Release Drafter.
This is starting to get a little old. It might be about time to plan a new one. It may not have changed, but it still can't hurt to maybe touch it up.
Well, and the cool thing there is we could consider doing that as part of the Contributor Summit that's coming up in early October for Asia Pacific, right? We're going to do an Asia Pacific Contributor Summit October 2nd, and we could very readily say, and we've got Hacktoberfest during the entire month of October. This is a great Hacktoberfest topic to say, look.
You mean Hacktoberfest?
That's the one, yeah.
Or Hacktoberfest? That's what that but, okay, I have to give our friends at DigitalOcean a little nudge. Now, if you look at the top banner, it says 30 days and so many hours, right? But if you look really close at it, it says Hacktoberfest 2020. Look, we know 2020 is sort of drug out, but it is 2021. We should speak with our friend at DigitalOcean. We have at least one there.
I'm sure when they get the new logo ready, they will refresh it.
Yes, I know, but it's still funny because it is 30 days out. Now, we're not going to speak a whole lot about Hacktoberfest this time, but we will have a plan to talk about Hacktoberfest in the stream 4 to 5 weeks roughly from now, because that will be leading up to October 1st. And hopefully we can have somebody come on and talk about what the Jenkins strategy, or the Jenkins project strategy is going to be for Hacktoberfest this year.
Absolutely.
Because doing it the quote unquote correct way, so you can either, like if they do the same thing last year, either get your shirt or plant a tree, you have to tag your things a certain way in order for things to work. So it would be good to have somebody on, probably from the project, to talk about how we would like to handle that this year.
I like that. I look forward to it.
Okay. One more thing to talk about today before we leave. And this may be the only time we talk about it, depending on when the next release occurs. I haven't done the math yet. It may fall right in this time frame. Devops World happens September 28th through the 30th. The first day is a day of workshops. 29th and 30th are just the two primary days, all online, so all virtual. And this year, the keynote speaker is none other than the Woz, the great and mighty Woz. And this should be interesting. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
The Woz is going to be there. And again, we can take a look at it. Lots of sessions from last year. And all the sessions that are available for this year, you can check it out under agenda at the top. There's workshops. Workshops, I'm not sure if there's paid ones or not. I'll be honest, I should know this, but I don't.
Well, so I'm doing a workshop this year.
Oh, you are?
So, yeah, come join us for the. Now we're limited to not more than 100 registrations for the workshop. So,
Right.
so
each workshop is $65. So the workshops are paid. Let's see where yours is. Do you remember what yours is?
Actually, and I think mine is free. I think mine's one of the complimentary ones.
It is. This is a free one.
Contributing to open source, and we'll be sharing with people how they can help contribute to open source projects, and we'll use Jenkins as the example, and it's going to be a bunch of fun.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up because I had not actually looked through this page yet. So there's actually 2 that are paid, and then there's a handful of complimentary workshops. So at least that's the way I'm reading it. It says complimentary. Let's make sure I'm not messing up here. Nope. Okay, we're good. So what's this other one here? We'll look at this one. So Terraform Bridge Crew, SBOM, which we sort of alluded to today. Software Bill of Materials is now a hot acronym, SBOM. And some stuff with CyberArk. Yeah, okay. So, again, devopsworld.com. Registration is free. If you want to take one of those 2 courses or workshops that are paid, those are paid. Mark's, though, is completely free. And you know what, Mark? Do you have your link? I forgot to give. Do you have your link for Devops World sign up?
I do not. Sorry.
I don't have mine either. Normally, I would give out Mark's link here to.
That's very kind of you.
So he would get the credit for bringing people in. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's we've got to do more active promotion. We will have more fun with Devops World. It's going to be a great conference.
Yep. Lots of Jenkins related, what do we call them? Sessions on this, really on the 29th and 30th. So I want to call out one in particular. And this one, if it loads up for us, thank you. And let's go to Wednesday. So it's Wednesday, Thursday. So you still get your Friday off. The one session I want to call out here, and this is really small, I apologize. There we go. This one that Dylan Dewhurst is doing, which he's one of our senior developer support engineers. From big and slow to small and agile, splitting monolithic Jenkins controllers for increased performance. If you are in charge of maintaining and managing the Jenkins infrastructure at your company, if you don't watch anything else, even if you decide to blow off Woz, go watch Dylan's session. This session is going to help you understand what you need to do so you're not going to be pulling your hair out and working on Sunday mornings at 3 a.m. This is going to be a great session. And there's numbers of other sessions too, but I wanted to call this one specifically out that Dylan is doing. So please, 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 like I said, if you blow off anybody else, your choice, do not miss Dylan's session.
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay. Mark, anything else that we want to call out today? I think we've hit all the points that we wanted to talk about. I think if anybody else has any other questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat. I want to go ahead and go back over my notes one more time to make sure that we hit all the points, which we did. Again, we'll be back in about 4 weeks, I think. Yeah, 4 to 5 weeks, if Mark doesn't take another vacation. Okay, all seriousness and completely breaking the fourth wall. This was planned for last Thursday, about a month ago, right? Because we planned, it's like, okay, it's going to release this date, so we'll set it up to do this day. We usually wait for a day. Number one, we don't want to do it on day of, just in case something goes sideways. Just complete transparency. But Mark knew that he was going on vacation, but forgot. So if nothing else, we need to help Mark remind him of his vacations so we can keep the schedules more correct.
That's an excellent plan. I like that plan.
If there was only automation software that could do that for you, Mark.
Or a written calendar on a piece of paper. I mean, there are all sorts of things that could help with that problem. Yes, thanks.
Okay. Anyway, you know what? We're just going to wrap it up here for today. And, if you have questions, they can join. You know what? I do want to bring up one more thing. I want to show, because recently chat changed for Jenkins. And I want to pull up, so it moved from IRC to, I can't remember the name of what it moved to.
Yeah, Libera or Libra. Depends on, I'm not sure how they pronounce it, Libra.
But more importantly, I want to call out one thing if I can type it correctly. I did. Okay, I'm going to share it again. Community.jenkins.io.
Oh, yes. And this is wonderful.
This is based on Discourse, not Discord, Discourse.
Correct.
I wish we had Discord, but that's a different conversation. If you have not looked into community.jenkins.io, and I need to bring Gavin on to talk more about this. This is a big deal. This does not replace the mailing lists. This does not replace Jira. This does not replace fill in the blank. However, it does give us different ways to ask questions that don't necessarily fit the mailing list format.
Right.
Like this one here, EKS Jenkins setup, ask a question. Great question, right? This is what we should be looking. Or like one you posted, I'm guessing you probably posted this one. Let's take a look at it.
I did.
You did post this one. So this is talking about 307 and Java 11. That's actually where the backport came from for 303 was from 307 for that image.
Right.
So, if you're fed up with trying to find things in the mailing lists, I'm one of those people. There's two sides to this coin. Yes, there's one more place to go look right now, but at least it feels like it was in the, I'm going to duck and cover for this, at least it's in the 2000s.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and there are so many cool things about Discourse and what it does for us with labeling. UI overhaul of code coverage plugin that's about 2/3 of the way down there, Darren, is a great example of Uli Hafner, a professor at a German university who uses Jenkins in his coursework to teach, is proposing some significant changes. And this is his request. Hey, give me some early feedback. I want to make the coverage plugin more usable for users. And I'm thinking about this, and this. This is a great place to give feedback to people that are doing crucial and very interesting work.
Correct. And Uli is also the primary maintainer of warnings in G, I believe.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes,
right.
That's correct.
All right. So if you weren't aware of this, community.jenkins.io. And thanks to the people at Discourse for helping make a lot of this possible.
Yeah, their donation has just been wonderful.
Okay. That's the one thing I did want to call out. So anyway, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up for today. If you've watched live, thanks for hanging out with us through the end. If you're watching the replay, we'll be back in about 4 to 5 weeks, roughly. Obviously, the date's probably been set for the next one, which is now almost 3 weeks away now, since today is Tuesday. Today is Tuesday? Today is Tuesday. Where we are, it's still Tuesday. It may be Wednesday where you are. I don't think it's Monday for anybody else anymore. Time zones, right? And we'll talk about the next release, which should be 303.2. Should be. Oh, wait. Was there... You had one more thing.
I did, and so we've got an ongoing discussion right now. One of the changes that came in as part of the transition to Debian Bullseye was that the locale on the Docker images changed from c.utf-8 to POSIX. Now, we were quite surprised because c.utf-8 can represent characters from all over the world, and in fact, some character sets for languages that are long dead, etc. Whereas the POSIX locale doesn't represent characters outside of US ASCII. And so that change was a surprise for us. And it's getting in the way of some users. Now, those of us who build our own images, it's pretty easy. You can set the locale yourself. But there's some discussion happening now. Should we roll a new version, Jenkins 2.303.2, to make that change? And the discussions are happening.
Cool. Okay. So there might be a .2 that is just that thing.
Right. And it will be a full release, but we've got to discuss it further in the community before we decide yes or no. The workaround is pretty easy, but easy workarounds still tend to be a distraction to users.
Correct. Okay. So also one more thing, I'm going to leave Mark up for this one today. If you look right underneath Mark, if you're watching on desktop, you'll see a subscribe button. Or if you don't see subscribe and it already says subscribe, thank you for subscribing. But if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and click on subscribe. Then once you do that, click that bell right to the right side of that, and you'll be notified anytime we do these live streams or anything else that comes out on CloudBees TV. So, Mark, thanks for hanging out today. For everybody else, whether you're live or watching the replay, thanks for hanging out with us today. And we will see you again in about 3 to 4 weeks. Bye-bye, everybody.